The Intellectual Gentlemen's Club.
Welcome back to the IGC podcast. I'm Jason Abbott. Thanks again for getting the word out, checking out our social media, checking us out on iTunes and Stitcher and directly on our website. If you guys want to support the podcast, you can do that by going to www.intellectualgentlemensclub.com. There's a support page on there. It'll give you our affiliate sponsors of Amazon.com, Audible.com, and the Total Human Optimization website, Onnit.com. If you purchase anything through the portal there, we get a little cut of that to help provide the hosting costs and things like that. So appreciate any support. We also have a PayPal button on there if you like. I am co-hostless tonight. I'm rolling solo, and I have tonight Michael Sherlock. He is an individual who was born and raised in Sydney, Australia, but he spent many years in Tasmania. He studied social anthropology and sociology at the University of Tasmania. He currently resides in Japan and is author of the series I Am Christ. He's studied Christianity and found it lacking in truth from what I've read on his book here. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thanks very much for having me on, Jason.
Hey, no problem. For people who aren't really familiar with your background, can you give us a little bit of a background? I know in the book you talked about being raised by a single parent, and your father was Irish Catholic, and I'm wondering how that shaped you as you are today.
Yeah, no, my grandparents were actually Catholic, and then my grandfather broke away from the church and became a communist. And so both my grandparents, or my father's parents, became communists and raised him communist. And so they were Irish communists, and he was raised communist, and he tried to raise me communist, but he also raised me to reject authority, and in so doing I rejected his authority. And yeah, so that kind of came back to bite him in the ass.
Right.
But yeah, so I come from I guess you could call it a communist family, but then my father remarried when I was about 7 into a Filipino Catholic family, and so I had strong Catholic influences growing up as well. And my aunties and all that were really lovely, and I spent quite a bit of time in the Philippines when I was younger, and we used to go to church every day, like it was an everyday thing, because my grandfather was a speaker at the church all the time. So yeah, I had a bit of contact with Christianity, and also the public school I went to in Sydney had scripture once a week, so we had to do scripture classes and stuff like that. And that's kind of, I guess, yeah. And also, before my father remarried, I was with babysitters. So, my father used to work as a security guard on the wharves in Sydney, on the docks in Sydney. And so my babysitters would take me to the Lutheran church. They were hardcore Lutherans. And so I used to go there quite a bit. And yeah, but I think I first rejected the idea of religion when I was about 6 or 7. Is my first memory, and that's when I questioned my scripture teacher at school, and she threw a pair of scissors at my head. Jeez. Just missed me. And my father encouraged me to question it. He was what you call a spiritual. He believed there was this higher force kind of power thing out there, but he couldn't really identify it or anything. And I see that as nonsense personally. That's my opinion. But yeah, so that's, I guess, my kind of upbringing, and now I'm skeptical of most things. Yeah, even myself.
Gotcha. That's so you would say maybe a healthy skepticism?
I guess so. It depends how you define healthy, but yeah. I mean, I like to question. Like, yeah, I think that something we could do with a little bit more in our world is a few more people that like to question, rather than just accept and follow, or believe the first anecdotal account they come across.
Right. Do you consider yourself an atheist?
I think that's the most accurate way to describe me, although there are degrees of atheism as far as I've read. And there was a good book, I can't remember, I read it a while back. It's called Atheism for the Perplexed. and in it, the author, I can't remember his name, he runs through, I've got the book here somewhere. He runs through the different types of atheists and things like that. And I guess the type of atheist I am is, well, I don't believe in gods. I don't believe in the supernatural. I don't believe in conspiracy theories as a sidebar. I don't believe in all that kind of stuff. But I don't say that God doesn't exist. I don't believe that God doesn't exist or the gods don't exist. So I am beliefless. Does that make me agnostic? Well, possibly, but my inkling is towards toward the proposition that gods don't exist. That's my leaning.
I
Uh,
got you.
yeah, I think we've got quite a lot of scientific evidence to show that, there is quite solid grounds for methodological naturalism, and the basis of science is quite a sturdy one, in my opinion.
Sure, I would agree with that. I know I've struggled with different belief systems over my life. I was baptized Catholic, and at a very young age, going to catechism, I tried to get out of that, and always knew that something was a little bit off when I would be in a church or when I was at catechism or whatever. This is prior to me being probably even a teenager. So since then, I basically took a back seat. I dabbled with Christianity. I dabbled with Buddhism and Taoism recently. But I guess I would probably consider myself an agnostic, being that I don't know what is out there. I know that there's something out there that I can't wrap my head around quite so much, but I don't subscribe to any of the like hardcore or fundamentalist beliefs as far as what God is or isn't in the world. So I can relate a little bit to that. I do take more of a, if I am sympathetic, it's more to the atheism side than the religious side, just because I don't know if you caught the debate between Bill Nye and Ken Ham. It seemed like there was a lot of bashing about it on the internet, as far as, why is this even taking place? This seems like two hardline sides going together, button heads. But I saw it as the question at hand was, is Ken Ham's model of creation a viable model? And I just don't see that it is. And every time that Bill would come back with a reason of why the world isn't 4,000 years old and closer to 3.5 billion years old was, well, there's a book that describes that. And it always comes back to the book. Well, my problem with the book, which of course we're talking about the Bible here, is that it's you can't really have any evidence behind that other than hearsay information that's 2,000 years old. And even with that, it's been tampered. You've had the Council of Nicaea, which determined what and what did not get in the book. You have the different gospels and some of that. I did read your book. Some of the gospels was hard for me to find. I'm not as well versed on the Bible as maybe I should be for not believing, but I haven't done that much research on it. So how did you begin studying the Bible? And once you knew something was wrong, where did you get to the point where you were digging in and you're like, okay, this really is a lot of horse shit?
In my younger years, in high school and so forth, I was more of a smart aleck and just rejected it because I didn't like most of the proponents.
Mm-hmm.
So I rejected it for, you could say, rational reasons. I thought, okay, these morons, these preachers out there, these Pat Robertsons and all these hate mongers, they seem to be displaying the negative side of their religion. And I've also met some very nice Christians. I need to balance that as well. Of course, there's good and bad of everyone. But when I really started digging in would be when I was doing my courses of social anthropology and sociology at university. Then we delved into ancient myths and looking at the development of ancient myth in the Near East in particular. And I found it really fascinating and I really enjoyed it. And so I began reading on the ancient Mesopotamian myths and looking at the ancient Egyptian myths and the Persian myths and the myths of Phoenicia and well, that's modern day Lebanon now, and looking at the surrounding myths. And then I started to study the Bible from a comparative mythological point of view. And so I began by just buying a whole bunch of notebooks and writing out the Old Testament word for word, with commentaries on each verses.
No, I'm sorry to
And so
interrupt.
I ended up.
Sorry to interrupt
Yeah.
you, but when you're talking about when you're writing the Bible verse for verse, what version of the Bible? Because I know that there's a
Yeah,
wide
there
variety
is.
of versions. Which one did you
That's an
start
excellent
with?
question. Yeah, that's an excellent question, Jason. Yeah. No, I'd done some research into the various versions of the Bible. And as far as I'm aware, and I'm still of this opinion, the NRSV version is the most accurate translation as far as the original Hebrew and Greek is concerned. Metzger is the senior editor of that Bible, Bruce Metzger. And yeah, as far as I'm concerned, yeah, in my opinion, you might have a different opinion. But the NRSV Bible, the New Revised Standard Version, is the best version in my opinion.
And why would you
And
say
so
that is? I'm just
uh,
curious.
there's a few examples I could give. Like if I compared it with, say, the Good News Bible of what's it called? The Good News Revised. No, it's the Revised. Can't think of the name of the Bible off the top of my head. I don't have it right next to me. I wish I did. Anyway, the Good News Bible, let's go. There'll be little omissions throughout the verses in the Bible. For example, in Isaiah, this is just going off the top of my head, sorry.
Sure.
In
No problem.
Isaiah chapter 8, where they're talking about Emmanuel, and, in 7:14 is the verse that Matthew draws from, or whoever Matthew was, the pseudonymous author of Matthew, draws from Isaiah 7:14 to say that Jesus will be born of a virgin. And this is a mistranslation on the original Hebrew, because it didn't say that the chosen one. It wasn't even the chosen one. It was just a sign for the king Ahaz of Judea that the Assyrian and Israelite coalition wouldn't defeat him, and so this child would be born as a sign of his success in the future against this coalition, the Northern Coalition. And anyway, so in that verse 7:14 it says, that the virgin will give birth to a child, and that's mistranslated in many Bibles. And actually in the original version it says the young woman is with child, and so she's already conceived. She's not a virgin.
Doesn't
She's
say
a
anything
young
about
woman.
virginity or anything. Okay.
It's well, there is this apologetic argument that the word alma, which is the Hebrew for young woman, can also be synonymous with the word virgin. And there is a little credence to that argument. However, they claim it's synonymous each and every time. And in my book, I point out, I think it's Proverbs 31 off the top of my head, where it's talking about the Alma who is an adulteress and da 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 da. She's obviously not a virgin, all right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there are a number of other examples like that. And in this particular example, the woman is already pregnant, and not by any supernatural means, according to the Bible. She's pregnant with either Isaiah's son or I think it's King Ahaz's son, depending on the tradition you go from. So anyway, this child is going to be born, and it's a sign of a military victory that took place allegedly 700 years before the Christian era. It wasn't a prophecy. Matthew, the author of Matthew, had a habit of just grabbing anything from the Old Testament and applying it to Jesus's life, or the alleged Jesus's life.
That's
So
convenient.
Jesus couldn't sneeze in the Gospel of Matthew without Matthew finding some, thing from the Old Testament to say, look, it's fulfillment of prophecy. No, it's not. And the author of Matthew does that on several occasions, and I point those out in my book, where that's obviously not the case.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so we're getting back to the Bible, the version why I chose the NRSV. In that version of the Bible, it has that direct translation properly. The young woman is with child, whereas many versions will change that. Now getting back to Isaiah 8, where they're talking about, and his name will be Emmanuel, talking about the child that will be born. In the Good News Bible, it says, his name will be Emmanuel, but they don't say that in the Good News Bible. They change it to, and God is with us, which is what the name Emmanuel means. But they change it to a statement. They change it from a pronoun form, which is what it originally is in Hebrew, and they make it a statement. Why do they do this? The reason they do this is because Jesus is never called Emmanuel throughout all the Gospels. Mm-hmm. Only in that one prophecy that Matthew drags from the Old Testament do they say Jesus will be called Emmanuel. Nowhere else is he called Emmanuel. So that kind of debunks that prophecy. but they've taken that out. They've edited that kindly. That whole verse, they've edited it out and changed it, just not to offend believers. And there are a number of instances throughout many of the modern translations that do that. They're almost like paraphrased Bibles that try to harmonize some of the discrepancies, whereas the NRSV doesn't. It tackles them and leaves them in there. And like, for example, in the Gospel of Mark, the last 12 verses are forgeries. They're interpolations that were added well after the time, if not centuries after the original Gospel of Mark was written. And so the original Gospel of Mark ends with the women running away from the tomb. Jesus says, "Go and tell my disciples that I've been resurrected, I've come back." And they don't tell anyone. They just run away scared. Anyway, so some scribes centuries later thought, well, that's not a very good ending. So people want to know what happened when he went and met his disciples. And so they added the 12 verses. And within those 12 verses, you have that famous, Jesus telling his disciples that if you believe in me, you'll be able to lay your hands on the sick and heal them, and drink deadly poisons and everything, and handle deadly snakes. And that's where the Appalachian Church gets it
Right.
from. And what they don't realize is they're going on a forgery. Their whole church is built on a forgery.
Right. Well, and that's almost proved by the founder of that church. I believe he was killed by a snake bite, wasn't he?
And his son as well.
Very ironic.
And his son as well.
Yeah, that's horrible. There's something
really
to be said
sad
about that. I mean, it's just right off the bat. While we're talking about the Gospels, if I'm not mistaken, these were written much later than the time of Jesus. And I mean, I'm not convinced one way or the other that Jesus actually existed. I'm willing to accept that there was a man named Jesus, in that vicinity, and he was able to go on, the preaching tour and whatnot. I don't have any quarrels with that, but what I have some quarrels with is there were many other gospels, and this is going back years ago. The Gnostic gospels, I started reading some of those when I was reading about the Bible a little bit, and there was a lot of interesting things in these other gospels. And I'm just curious, what's your opinion on why those were not allowed in, and only the four, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were selected for being in the canon there?
Well, not being a biblical scholar myself, I have to rely on the opinions of biblical scholars.
Okay.
And one of the primary scholars in this area I would rely on would be Bart Ehrman. I think he's quite good. According to the history and how this unfolded, is that there were various sects, as you mentioned, of Christianity. There were many Gnostic sects. There were the Proto-Orthodox sect, which later became the Catholic Church, which later broke off and became the Protestant Reformation, and so forth. But in the early days of Christianity, you're right, there were the Ebionites, who were a Jewish sect that believed that Jesus was not a kind of pagan-styled magical godson. He was just a regular human being, prophet of the Lord. There were, various different sects of Gnostics, and of various other branches of Christians as well. But what happened is that this Proto-Orthodox sect, they spread and eventually got into the seats of power through Eusebius in the 4th century, who was Constantine's pet Christian. And once that happened, well, then they had the power to eliminate all the other sects. And not only that, but Eusebius, being the chief church historian, rewrote Christian history in his works, the History of the Church. He rewrote the history of Christianity to make it look as if the Proto-Orthodox sect had always been the predominant sect. And if you read Bart Ehrman's book, Lost Christianities, you'll get a very different picture of early Christianity, one that's contrary to what most modern Christians believe. And so you'll see that the Proto-Orthodox sect was only one sect out of many. And you look at their Gospels, they were selected, as far as we're aware, they were selected in the late 2nd century, in about 180 CE, with Irenaeus, the church father from France, from Lyon.
Now
he was the one.
Now back at times of this time, if I'm not mistaken, what I've heard is that most people didn't even read the Bible back then. They weren't even allowed to read the Bible until maybe a couple hundred years ago. So it was quite easy for people in control, really, to limit what these people are learning about and kind of develop that around their own causes, wouldn't you say?
Mm. The rules on that particular, people reading the Bible for themselves, I think changed over time. I think in the early stages, it was more a matter of literacy. The
Sure, sure.
literacy rates were low, so people couldn't read the Bible in the very beginning. And so I've heard stories that they'd have scriptures in the church. For example, they'd have certain manuscripts in the church. This is prior to the officialization of Christianity prior to the 4th century. And they'd have it as a kind of totem thing. No one would be able to read it. They'd just be there. And so they talk and basically pass on oral traditions and things like that about Jesus and about this and that, which is why you get such a diverse array of oral traditions. If you read, for example, Justin Martyr's version of Jesus's nativity, and Justin Martyr was the 2nd century church father and apologist, he said that Jesus was born in a cave. So, okay, well, where's he getting this from? There was all these oral traditions floating around in the early stages of Christianity. And so they'd have the manuscripts in their church as a kind of totem. And along would come someone who could read. And they'd say, oh, look, can you read this for us? And he'd get there and read it for them. And so anyway, that was one of the reasons why not many people had direct access to the manuscripts, because literacy rates were low. And of course, it was only the elite who could read.
Right.
Those who were the leisured classes who had the education, or their slaves who were trained to read for their master's purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So there's certain slaves who were trained to read as well.
Reading back then, literacy was more of a luxury back then.
Exactly right. Exactly right. I mean, you were just too concerned with survival. If you're in the lower classes, you were either a serf of someone's, or you were just struggling to get by. But we're talking about, literacy. Oh, the rules on not reading the Bible. Yes, when the Dark Ages kicked in, the church made it illegal to read the Bible in certain languages. Particularly, for example, in England, you weren't allowed to read the Bible in English. If you were caught reading the Bible in English, I think you'd be imprisoned or even beheaded. So there were certain rules on that, and of course the
very
population there. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. In the second volume of my I Am Christ series, you won't look at Christianity the same, because I dig up direct sources, and when I quote historical sources of the atrocities committed by Christians, I'm taking it from their mouth, because I figure the best way to write history is to take it from those who wouldn't say the things they're saying if it was a lie. For example, when I document the atrocities committed by Francis Xavier, I'm taking it from Catholic historians who lived in the time of Francis Xavier, who loved him, and who were reporting on his atrocities as if they were wonderful things. So I'm taking those kind of historical sources. I don't take it from an opponent, because an opponent has the motivation to kind of, slander the other person. I'm taking it from those within the Catholic Church. I'm taking it from those within the Protestant Church when I report on Michael Severidus's execution, or I report on Giordano Bruno, or even Matthew Hammond in Britain, who was executed, the deist who was executed. It's absolutely atrocious, the history of Christianity, and that's what my second volume is concerned with primarily, is the growth of the church and the atrocities and the ignorance and the missionaries, and that's the second volume in my series. That's what I delve into there. So you won't look at Christianity the same, particularly if you haven't read on the subject too much. The first volume, as you pointed out, is about the Gospels. It's about pointing out those discrepancies and things like that. But the second volume gets into, the more yucky stuff.
Right. In the beginning of the first book here, you have something in the beginning, is what is the problem with belief? So belief is it's a loaded word. I mean, everybody has their own belief systems that dictates, basically how they view the world around them, themselves, the people around them. So when you have a belief with something, it's much different than an idea. I remember watching a movie. It's a Kevin Smith movie, Dogma. I don't know if you've seen it as a comedy.
Yeah,
And
I like that.
it was great. One of the things I took from the film was having an idea is much better than a belief, because you can change an idea much easier with new information. I think the problem with belief is people get so stuck in these molds that they don't want to break away from to cause themselves some psychic anguish that they stick with it no matter what. You see it all the time where you have some new information that's brought to somebody and they totally disregard it because it doesn't fall within their belief principles. And I think that's a damn shame. I know when I have some new information, just like when science does, they have to adapt and say, okay, we have some new information here. How does this fit into our scheme? And if it doesn't, you really have to just kind of let that go.
Mm. And that's what it's about, isn't it? That's why I call the first volume the Crucifixion, Painful Truths, because once we establish that model of reality in our mind, and we all do it, and like I say, beliefs aren't necessarily always bad or always a negative thing. There's a good side to beliefs as well. I mean, we couldn't organize our lives if we didn't believe things.
Of course.
If, for example, if we're just 100% skeptical, didn't believe anyone or anything any of the time, a fireman runs in and says, "Quick, the building's on fire, get out quickly." I don't believe you.
Right.
We wouldn't survive as a species.
That would not be healthy skepticism. No.
No, that wouldn't be healthy skepticism. So we need to balance this issue, and that's where I'm coming from. But you're exactly right. When we build a model of reality in our mind, and if you ever get a chance, I recommend you purchase this lecture by Dr. Stephen Novella he's a neuroscientist from Yale University, and the lecture series is called Your Deceptive Mind. I think it's a guide to scientific skepticism or something like that. It's a brilliant series, and he'll take you through that as well. Our beliefs are intrinsically entwined with our emotions. And this is neurologically and psychologically. I mean, we hold our beliefs in our ego, and our ego has certain defense mechanisms that kick in when unpleasant information comes in. That is information that challenges our model of reality. We would prefer to distort reality to preserve our self-esteem and to preserve our opinion of ourselves, than actually concede that our model of reality might be wrong. And so, I think it's a very important point. And like Dr. Stephen Novella says in his lecture series, just believing and accepting everything that conforms with your belief alone is what he calls the path of least resistance. And it's just going along. It's the easy way. But being a critical,
it's like the confirmation bias, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And okay. I talk about that as well. But the critical thinking comes in where you try to use energy, use effort to ebb the flow of that, path of least resistance. Try and, go off that path, and try and look at the world a little bit more critically. Look at yourself a little bit more critically, your own views and your own perceptions. And it was like in that debate with Bill Nye and Ken Ham, when they asked the question, "What could change your mind?" And, Ken Ham, Bill Nye said evidence.
Evidence, right.
And Ken Ham said nothing. And that just tells you, it's such a window into the psyche of that guy.
It's just not very rational. When you look at it, it's, that you need information to kind of base your opinion on things. And if your information comes from a book that hasn't been tried and true as far as information and evidence based, then that's a real problem in my eyes, especially when they're making policies, based on schools or what they're teaching kids and all this and that. That's when I have a problem with things. I believe everybody's entitled to their own belief systems and all that, but if you start trying to bring creationism into my school, I'm going to have a little bit of a problem with that for sure.
Exactly. And where does that stop? All right, well, if you're going to bring creationism, why not teach Hindu creationism as well?
Right.
Why not teach the creationism of the American Indians or of the Australian Aboriginals? I mean, they're all equally valid, or invalid, I should say. But, it's just, it's absurd to me. And I have this meme that I post around on Facebook sometimes. It says, creationism is not an alternative to evolution. It is a sideshow. And that's what creationism is. It's a sideshow. I just imagine clowns and jugglers and everything in my head whenever I hear someone say, well, I'm a creationist. I always get this image inside their head that there's this clown in this little car driving around just having a gay old time.
My image of when I hear the word creationism is I always see the caveman riding on the T-Rex. Just, it's the kind of, they just kind of disregard all the carbon dating and everything like it's a myth that the laws of physics can change depending on what you're viewing, and it's just realistically, and you just don't bend the laws of physics like that just based on a belief system. It's interesting.
Exactly. And this is what really bugs me about intelligent design. They come to us begging, saying, please accept us as an equal science. But to be a science, there must be something about your hypothesis that can be falsified. That is, okay, tell me something God can't do so I can test it, or God can do everything. Well, then it's not scientific. It's supernatural. And it can't be tested by science because science operates on the philosophy of methodological naturalism.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't have that, then we have no touchstone for reality. We can just say anything is science and we can propose anything. So the intelligent design can't be tested by science. It can be tested by logic, and it falls on its face in front of each and every logical test. It's special pleading, it's arguments from ignorance. It's, every logical test you put to it, it falls flat on its face. No, it's, for me, I see it as absurd, absolutely absurd.
And I'll have to say, when we're talking about creationism, I would say the vast majority, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the vast majority of Christians do not believe in creationism, that the world is 4,000 years old, that, people can be Christians and have the belief in like creationism fused with evolution, as far as, yes, I'm not taking these 7 days of creation as literally one 24-hour period, but these are, eons of time that, we've had to develop and evolve on the planet. I think a lot of modern day Christians have the idea that, yes, there is something to evolution. I think probably they're a little bit skeptical of that, depending on, their particular beliefs again. But I get in a conversation with a very good friend of mine who's a Christian, and we keep going round and round for years now. And it's just when I ask him about the different books in the Bible and how it got to be what it is today, really his answer for me is, well, that's how God ordained it, so that's how it is. It's like, that's not what I'm trying to go here for. That's not an answer. That's all you're telling me is, like Ken Ham did, like, there's a book for that. Like, yes, I know that's what it says, but why does it say that? Why was it removed? Why is it not there? Why is this piece changed? It's, how many different how many different languages has the Bible been translated from? What's been lost in that translation? Who's passed these stories down word of mouth? It's just far too much it's my bullshit detector just goes off the charts every time I start talking to somebody about the Bible, unfortunately. And, if we got listeners out there who are Christian, I hope you're still tuning in. hope you're not pissed off to turn it off, because, I do believe it's very good to question your beliefs. I continually question mine, and I feel like that's the only way you can be honest with yourself. So
yeah. Well, what if we're wrong?
Then we're fucked, man.
Yeah. If we're wrong, we're presenting arguments that are going to sharpen the axes of apologists. That is, they're going to sharpen their arguments. So it's no harm either way. And if we are wrong, we're going against an all-intelligent, all-powerful creator. What threat could we possibly pose to that?
Right.
I mean, I see it as an absurd proposition, but I'm saying, okay, let me take your theory for a second and say, well, what harm could I do? None. So there's no harm in me questioning it. If you're insecure about your God's going to get his panties in a bunch or whatever, then your God's really petty, and you're a little bit insecure about your God, I think, if you're worried about me, a little mortal worm attacking your God, then there's something in your head that tells you that it's not real, is it? And it's just your ego, projecting to the world around you. But getting back to theistic evolution that you raised as well, that's a rationalization. I think when Darwin dropped the theory of evolution on the world, and I say dropped because it was like an atomic bomb.
It's an anvil, right? Okay. Yeah. Atomic bomb. Okay, I'll go that one.
When Darwin dropped the theory of evolution on this world, those that couldn't blindly reject it because it was just overwhelming, it was like a tsunami, of an intellectual tsunami, those that couldn't, reject it outright had to try and swim with the tide and adapt their beliefs to it. And this is what psychologists call an adaptational strategy. It's a form of rationalization. So what they do is they change peripheral beliefs in order to protect the core belief. The core belief is the Bible is the word of God. So when that happened, you saw this adaptation take place where they started to change their interpretation of Genesis and of everything. Okay, like you just brought up the eons, that's the day age theory, where, okay, well, it wasn't 7 days. Each day represents, this eon, this massive, period of time. Okay, well, where did they get that idea from? They get that idea from the Zoroastrians, the ancient Persians, is their creation myths tell it like that. And they get that in turn from the Hindus, who, 1,000 years for us is the blink of an eye for Brahma and all this stuff. And so that idea goes back a long way. So they jumped on the first rationalization they could in terms of that. Another one that came up, particularly when the science of geology, I'll say again, was dropped on the earth like a bomb. When geology established that the earth was much older than it was, well, then they had to reinterpret Genesis and say, well, between verse 1 and 2, there's a gap.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not only absurd linguistically, literally, it's not only absurd theologically, but it's absurd scientifically as well. So they had to posit that there was this creation in verse 1 of Genesis 1:1, creation, destruction, recreation, Genesis 1:2. So it's called the destruction, and I can't remember the exact name of the theory. It's in my book. I write things down because I always forget. But anyway, it's in my book. Anyway, they posit that the earth was created, destroyed, and recreated within the first 2 verses of the first chapter. Anyway, that's the hard gap theory. Then they have softer gap theories, because once that gap theory failed and all the theologians rejected it and the scientists were rolling on their backs laughing, they said, okay, what about there was a gap between verse 2 and 3, or 3 and 4, or 4 and 5, and they just kept saying or, and they're called soft gap theories. And there are a few nascent fundamentalists who still hold on to this gap theory, or a soft version of the gap theory. And so these are rationalizations. And here we get back again to the problem of intelligent design and religion versus science. Religion forms a conclusion and then tries to develop arguments to protect that conclusion. Science develops arguments to try and get to a tentative conclusion. That there's a very big difference in the cognitive processes there. And science's method is much more sound, in my opinion, and it's much more humble because it develops tentative conclusions. It says, okay, well, this is based on what we have. There is no absolute in science.
Mm-hmm.
As science is much more humble than that. And I really love that about science. We can change, like Bill Nye, evidence will change my mind. Ken Ham, nothing. We keep getting back to that. And I think that's a really important point, a very important distinction between religion and science, in my opinion.
So when, aside from Christianity, we've kind of been bashing that for a little bit here, but let's take some of the other religions, the monotheistic religions. What are your opinions on that? I mean, I'm pretty sure they're going to be about the same, but do you see any more validity or honesty in the others as far as Islam or what am I looking for here?
Judaism?
Yeah, Judaism. Sorry.
Yeah, I see equal invalidity in the 3 of those. They're my 3 least favorite religions. In my opinion, if we look at the modern world, I prefer Judaism over its demonic spawn. That is Islam and Christianity, because Judaism is not so much a proselytizing religion. It doesn't go out and try and convert everyone to its own belief system. It's ridiculous. It contains arcane teachings and horrible book, the Torah. If you've ever read the Torah thoroughly,
there's a lot of violence in there. Yeah.
It's disgusting. I mean, there's laws that regulate human sacrifice in Leviticus, that teach you, well, once you dedicate your child or a family member or someone beneath you to the Lord, and, you can't take them back, so they must be put to death, and don't unconditionally dedicate me then. It's like there's all these horrible laws and horrible stories, and it's just a disgusting collection of books. And I know it's not politically correct to say that, but in my opinion, Judaism is a really horrible religion. That's not to, and I've now let's make a distinction here because people get really sensitive. I have a lot of Jewish friends, and I'll make that qualification. Yeah, okay, I've done that. Good, where that's out of the way. Judaism is a really terrible religion, in my opinion. I really don't like Judaism, and yes, I do separate the believer from the belief. So yes, I know a lot of people who call themselves Jews who are wonderful people, same as Christians, same as Muslims. I grew up with many Muslim friends, and they're wonderful people, very warm, hospitable, inviting people. As far as Islam goes, it's a plague on the earth, in my opinion. It's an
Okay.
absolute plague. Just, yeah, my future books, I'm going to focus on Islam a lot more. I've been reading and studying the Quran and the Hadiths, particularly the two primary Hadiths, and it's just horrible. And Sharia law. I mean, oh, look at
It,
Saudi Arabia. And in this new book I've got coming out within the next month, it's called The Gospel of Atheism and Free Thought According to Sherlock. I bash Islam quite a bit.
the
Yeah.
interesting thing about religions here is that you can kind of pick and choose what you want to subscribe from. I don't think that really you have to, buy the whole thing, the whole ball of wax, as they say. Um,
Mm,
but it's a little bit it's more difficult to do that than say like with Buddhism. I don't require like some of the ideas in Buddhism I really enjoy, and I find
mm,
certain truths in. But I
mm,
don't need to believe that the Buddha or Siddhartha Gautama was an actual person who walked the
mm,
earth. Really, the message is in the teachings, and I don't have to. If the Buddha was a myth, that's fine with me. It's the teachings that kind of resonate with me, and I don't. As far as some of the teachings in Christianity, as far as like love one another and things of that nature, I don't need to believe that Jesus was the one true Son of God who died for man's sins, and the only way
mm,
through heaven is through Him, to be able to get the benefit of that religion. With the problem I think with most religions is that it's really you're taking the good with the bad. And I think most
mm,
people, when like a lot of Christians, I don't think that they really even understand um, the true origins behind Christianity. And I don't really think I do either. But you hear about all kinds of things like traditions being passed down, like as far as paganism or mushroom cults, or there's all kinds of different things that, and we could be dabbling in conspiracy theory here as well. But I just can't buy the story hook, line, and sinker. It just doesn't get me. And
yeah.
really, I just don't understand the thought process of other people, how they can defend it so blindly when you bring up, discrepancies like you do in your book. I can't, it's countless times in your book there where you give specific examples of verses in the Bible and contradictions back and forth. So, listeners out there, if you get a chance, I'll have some information on the books here that you can check out and read for yourself. I found it was a great read for me, and I didn't look at it as
Thank you.
I didn't look at it as something that was designed to convert people to atheism. It's more designed for people who are questioning already, and I think on your website you have something here where you're looking for something you actually found that it's an epiphany, not something you need to. Um, I'm butchering this up here, man. I'm sorry.
No problem.
I can
The
find it here in
crisis
just a
of
minute.
faith thing.
Oh, here it is. It says, "The sunny fields of free thought and rational thinking lay ahead, and you pick up my book. You finish reading it and discover that your crisis of faith was not a crisis after all, but an epiphany." And
Mm,
I found that very powerful because there's been times in my life where I I really did believe in Christianity. I wanted to believe so bad, and I was almost putting on an act for myself to make myself believe in it. I had these crises of faith, and the more I dug into it, it really was an epiphany. I'm like, maybe all this really is bullshit. Maybe there's something behind all this where uh, I just found it a great read. So
thank you very much, Jason. And I think you made a really good point that we've been talking about the negative side. Now let's talk about the positive side.
Mm-hmm.
When people like yourself and myself are able to step back from the belief system and unplug from the belief system, well, we can dip in. We can observe it from afar and say, well, the Good Samaritan, the story of the Good Samaritan, what a beautiful story. I like that. That I can use that. Stoning children who talk back to you. No, I don't think I need that. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Love your neighbor. Okay. Yeah, I'll take that. I like that too. And we can pick and choose. You can look at the Buddhist scriptures and you can say the same thing. You can look at the Quran. There's some nice stuff in the Quran, beautiful stuff in the Quran, horrid stuff as well. You can take the good and you can get rid of the bad, and you can, because for you, it's not the word of a God, an all-knowing God. For you, these are just philosophies and ideas that are subject to criticism. You can take them how you wish to take them. You've got control of your own mind. You've got psychological sovereignty. And I think that's a very important thing that you raised. We can bash these religions, and we should beat the hell out of them, in my opinion. But we can also not turn a blind eye to the good things in those religions. If you're a believer, then you become embittered by the whole package together. Like you're saying, you have these rationalizations and these knee-jerk reactions, emotional reactions to people debunking your religion. But why can't you just step back and take the good stuff that works for society and for yourself and for your family and for your friends and reject the rubbish? Why do you have to believe?
I think it's largely because of fear. I think a lot of these people, if you don't believe in everything in the Bible, then you must be sinning for some reason, and then you're going to end up going to hell. So I think fear is a very powerful emotion that really kind of drives the belief system in a way. We've had somebody else on the podcast. I don't know if you're familiar with his work. Daniele Bolelli wrote a book called Create Your Own Religion. And in the book, he picks apart a lot of different religions as far as animistic religions, the Judeo-Christian, polytheism. So there's a wide variety of craziness that's in all of these books, in manuscripts or whatever you want to call them. But there's also a great variety of things that you can use in your life to build a framework to live a better life. And I thought that was great about his book because, love your neighbor. I'm going to take that one from Christianity. Practice mindfulness. I'm going to take that one from Buddhism. Let it be. Take that one from Taoism. So all these great ideas you can use in your own life, and then you can discard the rest. Take what you like, leave the rest. I've heard that before as well. So
exactly right. And I mean, this is what we should be doing. We should be critically thinking.
Absolutely. That's the only way to stay honest, really. I mean,
you're exactly right. And fear, you're coming back to your issue you just raised. Fear, I think, is hitting the nail on the head. That's exactly right. And I think we, as a species, overall, the majority of us still need these beliefs, these religious beliefs. But we, as a species, need to become more comfortable with uncertainty. I think once we can become more uncomfortable with uncertainty, I think we'll become more humble, and I think we'll become less religious, personally. We need to be more comfortable with uncertainty, in my opinion.
I mean, one of the things in Buddhism is life is suffering, and nobody wants to suffer. Nobody wants to believe that all was for nothing, and the lights go out and that's it. And I think there's a lot of people that it's a very fearful thing. That scares the shit out of me. I want to believe that there's something. I would want nothing more than to believe the whole ball of wax, that if I do live my life for God and for Jesus, that I'm going to be allowed into heaven, where it's just perpetual bliss for the rest of eternity. There's nothing more that sounds more appealing to me than a place like that. I think that there's probably something that happens after death. What that is, I'm not sure. I've had these little glimpses of it, of little epiphanies I've had in my life, whether they've been chemically induced or induced through meditation, these little tiny insights that allow me to see basically all, connect to something a little bit deeper. And I think ego plays a big part in that. How do you think what's the best way for people to check their ego when they're having these moments of cognitive dissonance? How in your life, what is the best way to check your own ego? I mean, it is useful to a degree, but it can definitely overwhelm us, don't you think?
Yeah. I think we need to, to keep drumming this home, we need to stop following the path of least resistance, and we need to face the uncomfort of realizing that we might be wrong, that our model of reality might need adjusting.
Right.
I think if we can constantly do that, we can step back emotionally from our beliefs, I think we'll have a better chance at changing faulty parts of our beliefs or faulty beliefs entirely when new evidence comes to light. We should be always willing to change. In my opinion, I think we should always be willing to change, which is why I'm always hesitant to apply a label to myself, because, well, if I apply a label to myself, then somewhere in my psychology, maybe I'm going to want to start to conform to that
Sure. I can see
label,
that.
and then that's going to trap me in a little bit, and I don't want to do that because I want to keep my options open. So I think we should be always willing to change, but that change should really only be fostered or be inspired by evidence, when new evidence comes to light. And then how do we look at that evidence? We need to question that as well. That's where our skepticism comes in. We need to look at the evidence skeptically and say, okay, well, what are the pros of this evidence? What are the cons? What are the weak points of this evidence? And if we can constantly do that and keep a little distance emotionally, and like you say, not form a belief, but have an idea, I think that's where we start to become more flexible. And if we can become more flexible, perhaps we will psychologically mature as a species a little faster. I'm not sure. It's an idea.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. One thing I wanted to talk to you about is it was either in the preface or part one. You talk about a healthy destruction of belief held back can cause repression, and repression can lead to neurosis. And I think that's largely a lot of what we're seeing in Western culture right now, as far as the rate of use of natural products, and just kind of raping and pillaging the earth, and just using fuel like it's going out of style, and paying no attention to what we're doing to the planet. There's a lot of people out there who believe that the planet is here to be raped and pillaged. I don't feel that way. I feel like that it is we're not sustainable. Obviously, if you look at any of the studies that are out there on Western culture, like, we cannot sustain what we're doing right now. I think that there's almost like a mass neurosis that we're dealing with on society level that really needs to be addressed, because if we don't check what we're doing right now, and I'm guilty of it at the same time. I live in a house. I have 2 cars for my family, and I live a typical American life, I guess you could say. And I struggle with that. I try and do my part. I try and cut back a little bit, but I feel like the machine cogs are just so heavy, and they just roll over everybody. I would love to just kind of pull out and disconnect from society, but I know that's not realistic. So I have to walk this line, and I'm just hoping that in the future maybe more people can think about what they're doing and put a deeper thought into and deeper layers into their everyday life, and maybe that would help us out a little bit. Just kind of thinking out loud here.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely think that Carl Jung had something when he was talking about that neurosis. And you can see it in our consumerism. You can see it in our religions. You can see it in,
You just have to look a little deeper. You have to look under the surface, which I think a lot of people don't want to do. I think that's another big problem. People really don't give a shit. I've talked to people, and when I tell people about my podcast, I get a wide variety of reactions. One is that they think it's really cool. The other is, well, what do you talk about? And I talk about, we've been over psychedelics. We've been over, all kinds of different shit that people kind of, it's more out there. I try not to follow so much of a mainstream path. And the looks, and like, why are you talking about that? Like, what are you talking about? Like, people don't want to look any deeper. They don't want to question these things. And I find that to be real boring in life, to walk around like that and not question anything. It's, how do you grow as a person? I don't know.
Yeah. No, I like the eclectic nature of your podcast. I was having a look at some of the titles before, and I think it's really good. We need to explore these things.
Thanks,
we need
Michael.
to explore different things. And if you go to my internet forum, for example, like if you go, for example, a lot of my Facebook fans will they call me, he's a hardcore militant atheist, and he, no way would he associate with theists and this kind of thing. But the people who run my internet forum are all theists and deists, and they're my friends. Like, they're like, well, hang on, that just throws me for a loop.
The
Like,
world,
what
the
are
world's
you
not
then?
falling apart then? It's,
Yeah, like, what are you, man? It's like, I don't get it. It's like you love Richard Dawkins and you love these guys, but you're also got these theists running you. What the hell is your, it's like, well, I like to learn. I personally like to learn. I like to explore different things. If you look at the different forum headings on my internet forum, there's Buddhism, there's the occult, there's all this freaky deaky stuff. There's, atheism, there's everything there.
yep,
And it doesn't necessarily reflect me. It reflects the things I want to learn about.
sure,
And I want to learn about as much as I can. It doesn't mean I'm going to accept everything I learn. It just means I want information. I like information. It makes me happy. I get a little shot of dopamine when I get new information. I mean, I get it's a reward thing.
yep,
But yeah, I think we should all have that attitude. We should all learn a little bit more, I think, and step outside of our comfort zones and challenge ourselves a little bit more. In to answer that previous question you asked me about how can we, I guess psychologically evolve to grow past that dissonance and not follow the path of least resistance all the time.
yep.
Yeah.
While we're talking about that, a lot of people, in myself included, I almost look as atheism as a religion itself. And we talked in the beginning how there's a lot of different type of atheism. But do you think that it's so easy to go black and white, like religion is white, atheism is black? Do you see it somewhere in the middle, or where do you lay on that line?
Yeah, it's interesting. That's a really good question. There does appear to be a kind of tribalism developing, particularly over the internet. And I'm certainly in that tribe, the atheist tribe on the internet. That's because my skepticism and my non-belief line up perfectly with the internet atheists that are there on the internet forming this tribe. And we've got symbols and we've got things like that that connote atheism. There are certain speakers, certain authors, certain commentators who are the quasi-prophets of atheism, and I'm talking about Hitchens and Dawkins and Sam Harris. Sam Harris has nearly been ostracized because he came out with a book on spiritualism. So I think he's a lot of atheists are angry at him.
Yeah, they get fired up, but it's whatever side of the fence you're on, people do get fired up, and
Yeah,
that's just kind
exactly.
of the nature of it. Unless you take a step back, like we're talking about, and just kind of look at things, people are
Yeah.
really quick on the trigger to just fire off and get pissed off.
Yeah, they do. And this, I see this like on my page a lot. Like I did this last night, especially. I lost a whole bunch of fans on Facebook because I made a picture meme with a picture of bacon, and I wrote, unlike Allah, bacon is no joke, give it a try. And like I put a halal sticker next to the bacon, and I just lost so many fans. And then I did a beef one for the Hindus as well because I thought I don't want to leave the Hindus out. And so I just lost all these fans, and everyone's just getting so angry at me. But yeah, as far as Sam Harris talking about spiritualism, and we should make that an atheist word. For me, I don't believe in spiritualism. I don't believe in the spirit. Spirit is a Latin word, spiritus, which means breath. We all have breath. There's nothing fancy about breath.
Mm-hmm.
I'm skeptical of a lot. I'm skeptical of anything that can't be demonstrated very, how would you say, materialistically to me.
Okay.
I'm very skeptical. But I don't disbelieve. Unbelief and disbelief are two different things. I don't say, no, that's not right. It's not real. It's rubbish. I'm skeptical of it. That's all. I have a scale. I weigh possibilities and probabilities, and I adjust that scale with new evidence. I don't categorically say, no, the spirit doesn't exist. I don't believe there's a ghost in the shell, so to speak. I believe the brain is the mind. It controls the mind. If you look, you get brain damage, the mind changes. We can do a number of other tests to show quite unequivocally that the brain is in control of the mind. I know there's a lot of people who believe in near-death experiences and how that they sort of use that as a quasi kind of anecdotal evidence to suggest that there's a higher power out there. I disagree, but I don't know. I could be wrong. I'm always willing to say I could be wrong.
That's a healthy
But
attitude,
my
I think.
motto, yeah. Well, not only am I at not a fully developed stage, I'm only 36 years old, but our species is not at a fully evolved stage either. We're in a process of evolving. We're in a process of psychologically evolving, of mentally evolving, of physically evolving. We're in a process.
We're like a
So
bunch
it's
of
good to
crazy
keep,
teenagers running around on this floating rock. That's what's happening.
yeah. And the crazy ones are the ones who get to control everything, it seems.
Yeah, it's funny how that
I don't
works
know. I
out.
think, yeah, I see society a lot like vegetable soup. You know, the scum rises to the top when you're cooking it. And I think that's what we're seeing in society. The scum rises to the top. The most vocal maniacs rise to the top. But yeah, getting back to spiritualism, I don't believe in any of that stuff. But I'm so happy that Sam Harris wrote that book and kind of challenged that tribe that was, that he was kind of in a clique with, that I'm in a clique with as well on the internet. I mean, a lot of my friends are hardcore atheists, and a lot of them will say there is no God. And I ask them, how can you say that? Well, it's just nonsense. Read the Bible. Okay, well, let's leave the Bible out for a second.
Right.
What about, say, the creator from, say, a Zoroastrian perspective? Well, it's basically the same thing. And it's where pretty much the Christians got their monotheistic God from, that, and the ancient Egyptians, Aton and Amen as well. But, okay, what about another conception? What about a polytheistic conception? Okay, what about animism? Well, let's look at that. And for me, I don't believe any of that stuff because like I said before, it's incapable of being falsified. You can't test it scientifically. You can test it logically. That is, just because you don't know, just because you don't know X doesn't mean Y is the case. And this is what a lot of theists and deists will do. They'll say, well, you don't know that there's not spirits in the trees, for example. That's right. I don't know. So why should I believe? But they think, well, because you don't know, you should believe. It's like, no, that doesn't make sense to me.
No,
if I don't know, then I don't know. I
backwards, in my
shouldn't pretend
opinion.
I do.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
It's backwards.
Right.
I don't get it. Yeah.
And you look at intelligent design. Intelligent design is one big argument from ignorance. That's what it rests on. One big argument for we don't know, therefore God. You can't argue that. That's an impossible argument logically. It's unscientific.
Yeah,
and it's illogical.
The one thing that I keep coming back to is, and I have to concede this point to whoever's arguing it. You can't get something that came from nothing. There had to be something prior to the Big Bang or whatever happened. I think that there could be a variety of explanations for that, but I think that us humans we are just too puny to understand the complexities, what goes on in the natural world. We'll never understand everything. It's impossible to look prior to the Big Bang. We have no way of seeing what there was, if there was anything. So there's these conundrums that pop up, and people don't know how to understand them. They don't know how to explain them. So I think a lot of that, rests on religion to give people answers. And people don't want to be left in the dark. They want information. Like you're saying, you get this little dopamine, every time you get some new knowledge. Maybe that's the same case for people with the religious background where
it's exactly the same.
Yeah, so we're just exactly looking at it from different perspectives.
Yeah, and like I think Lawrence Krauss, the physicist, he explained his theory or scientific theory of the nothing being actual, antimatter versus matter or something like that. I'm not a scientist. I can't explain it very well. But I think you should look at Lawrence Krauss for an explanation of something from nothing. Although nothing's not technically nothing, it is actual something. But it's essentially nothingness.
It's a slippery slope, Michael.
It is, yeah, it is. No, I agree. And I think we should be looking at all these things. I think we really should. And we should, like I said before, we should embrace uncertainty a lot more. I think it's really healthy. And I mean, we don't know everything, that's right. But does that mean it's unknowable? I don't think so. I think it's a process. We're in a process. And I think that what we don't know today, we may know tomorrow. We need to keep that option open. And I think one of the logical fallacies a lot of people make is they say, well, It's unknowable, full stop. And that is they're pretending to be prophets who can see the future and what we may or may not know in the future. We might work these things out in the future. We might roundly conclude in the future scientifically that there is a God or that there is not a God.
Mm-hmm.
My feeling is there is not, but I'm saying that we might know these things in the future. Unknown doesn't equal unknowable, in
Yeah,
my
you
opinion.
look back.
Unknown doesn't equal, yeah.
Yeah, look back 200 years ago, and nobody knew what the internet was, but we have it now.
Yeah.
It's a technology breakthrough of like no other in the history of time. In my
Yep.
opinion. I mean, I'm talking to you literally halfway across the globe at the same time. You're in Japan, I'm in Detroit, and just by
Mm.
this, internet connection, we're having this conversation. It's recorded and it's gonna be blasted out, and anybody can listen to it anywhere in the globe. It's fascinating to
Yeah.
me.
It is. You're exactly right. And I mean, let's take another example like that. And before the germ theory came in, and people thought that witches and warlocks and sins and evil created
Casting
diseases.
spells, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. And they didn't know, okay, and they didn't exactly know how to control that. And well, they thought they did. They believed they did, and that belief led to a lot of unnecessary suffering.
They were
So if
just
they had
ignorant
been a
of
little
it,
bit,
and when I say ignorant, I mean ignorant is not you're stupid, but you just did not have the information. You just
yeah,
didn't have it. So that I think a lot of people are quick to, and I've said it before on the podcast, to call people stupid or things like that. But you know, I try not to use that word. I try and give people the benefit of the doubt. But ignorance, I do like as a word, just because of what it means. You just don't know. So, and there's a lot
exactly.
of things that I'm ignorant of. I'm also 36 and nowhere near to being, a fully developed human like you're talking about. But the
Mm,
journey is where the adventure is, and I encourage everybody to keep looking always.
yeah, definitely. And like reasonable ignorance, I mean, all of us have it. Like you say, you're 36, I'm 36. Even a 70-year-old has reasonable ignorance. We're only human. We're
Right?
fallible, and so our beliefs are fallible too. And we learn that, we get comfortable with uncertainty. I think possibly we'll become a more humble species. I'm not sure.
Well, on that note, let's wrap it up here. You want to talk about what kind of future projects you have coming up?
Yeah, I mentioned one before. Thanks, Jason. I mentioned one before. I've got the Gospel of Atheism and Free Thought coming out
Hmm.
in a month or so, and the writer of the forward is David McAfee. He's a pretty well-known atheist author, very nice guy, really lovely guy. That book's coming out, and that book's set out in three parts. It's got three books within that book. It's the Book of Atheism, the Book of Free Thought, and the Book of Heresy. And the first two books, the Book of Atheism and Free Thought, are just memes, quotes, and musings I've written because I got sick of people regurgitating memes and quotes and sayings from other people,
Yeah.
and I wanted to create my original ones. So I've created original ones there, and it's kind of like a coffee table book in that sense. Those first two books within that book, it's a coffee table where you read a little quote and then you discuss it with your friends. It's like, well, what do you think about this? And so I like that kind of thing because it
Yeah,
leaves
me
a
too.
lot of thinking for the reader to do. The reader can sit there and chat with their friends about it. Well, I read this in this book and it says this, and it's not a massive book like the I Am Christ series where you've got to read it and lug through all that information and all that textual criticism and all that stuff and go, oh my god, this is really easy. This is it's meant to be an easy read. So those first two books, and so the first book is Atheist Quotes and Memes. The second part of the book is Free Thought Quotes and Memes. That's talking about a lot of the stuff you and I spoke about today, belief and, becoming more comfortable with uncertainty and et cetera, et cetera. What is truth and et cetera. And then the third book, the Book of Heresy, within that book is a series of articles and essays I've written bashing religion, basically, or bashing the two primary Abrahamic religions, Christianity and Islam. And so that's that. And that they're pretty well sourced, I'd say. Like they're fairly well sourced. And the book's coming out, hopefully, I don't want to step on my new publisher's toes, but around April, I hope.
Okay.
Yeah, so around that time. And then I'm in the middle of writing another book called The Pagan Philosopher Jesus Christ. And in that book, I'm showing where all of Jesus's so-called quote unquote revelations come from. centuries prior to he said them. These
Okay.
philosophies and teachings were in existence.
Sounds controversial.
It should be good, I think. Well, it's documented with primary historical sources. Plato said it first. Confucius and Buddha said it first. These guys said it first, and I can show the anthropological link between these places where these original texts were written and where the Christians first began to write or form the oral traditions which created their gospels. And so I do that in Jesus Christ, the Pagan Philosopher. And then I've got 20 parenting tips for God coming out later next year. That's where I give God some parenting advice, the God of the Bible, which is a spin-off on a little meme I did called the 7 parenting tips for God. Like don't kill your children is tip number 1 and
That's
things
a pretty
like
good
that.
one, yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think, even God needs advice.
Oh man, good stuff. Well, where can people find you? Where can our listeners find
Okay,
you?
thanks. Yeah, you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/michaelsherlock.author. You can find me at my website, michaelsherlock.org. Where else can you find me?
On
You
Twitter?
can find me on Twitter. Yeah,
Okay.
you can find me on Twitter at Sherlock Michael. My name's reversed on Twitter. Yeah, and you can find me in Japan if you're really keen, or someone's issued a fatwa against me. I'm sure you're gonna find me eventually.
Fair enough. All right. Well, thanks again for being on, Michael. I really appreciate your time. I really did
No
enjoy the
problem.
copy of the book that you sent me. I found it very enlightening. It was thought provoking at the very least. So I encourage
Thank
all
you
you
very
to
much.
check that out. I'll put a review up on the website before this podcast comes up so you guys can check it out with a link on there. Again, our music was brought to you by Secrets today. You can find his stuff on SoundCloud. Discuss with us online. Facebook, Twitter, iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube. We're all over the place out there. Google Plus. I try and keep up on everything the best I can. If you want to support us again, intellectualgentlemen'sclub.com/support. You can find all our links on there. Michael, thanks again for your time.
Thank you very much for having me, Jason.
Hang loose out there, everybody.
Sit down.
Never said I was a gentleman,
Actually,
motherfuckers.